it's Alex York.
Hi, I'm Zoya Hasan, and we're the editors of the 30 Under 30 list.
We are here coming to you today to speak about the 2026 Under 30 list, which just launched first week of December. Zoya, how are you feeling about having officially launched our little project into the world?
I feel awesome. I mean, we've been working on it for months and months, and it's just been such a big team effort from so many different people and teams at Forbes. So I'm thrilled.
It's same. I'm excited. It's truly a beast to put together. Everything from like the summit to the list itself. For those who don't know, we have 20 different categories, 30 people on each category. So as I said, it is a huge team effort to bring this all to fruition, both in the physical magazine, in the online versions. So there's so much that has, gone into this project over the last couple of months. Zoya, from your perspective, what do you think is like the biggest takeaway of this year's list?
Yeah, I think every year we kind of spot trends and, we spot what the big theme is. And I think now for the past 2 or 3 years, the big theme really has been AI. And I think this year it's even more prominent. So you can just kind of see how that industry has really grown. But AI is now part of like every single, you mentioned the 20 categories. I think in every single category, we're seeing some sort of play on AI. And so many of our featured honorees or call outs, like on science, they're building robots using AI, or on the marketing side, they're using AI to build the apps that people can use to buy tickets to events. So it's like really penetrated into so many different industries. And then obviously we have our core AI category too, which I think is responsible for, $1.5 billion in funding this year. The total funding on the list this year is somewhere about 3.5 billion, higher than that. And AI is responsible for 1.5 of that. So that's a pretty significant amount. And I think it's just really, coming to every single industry. How have you seen AI kind of take over this list this year?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think, well, first of all, we launched that AI list specifically last year for the first time. And I think when we launched that, it was like really because we were having these conversations of like AI is infiltrating so many different industries, but like let's have a category that's solely focused on AI. But I think you're definitely right. Like even though there is a category that's speaking about into like the companies that are AI first, second, third, fourth, like they're solely focused on, AI models and agents and, all the different ways that these companies are using it. It also has impacted every different industry on the category, on the list. Honestly, I think that there's not a single category that doesn't have someone who's involved in AI in some way, shape, or form on the list this year. I mean, I think about the retail and e-commerce category, for instance. The call out or the featured honoree for that category is Jenny Wang, and she is building Alta, which is an AI-powered shopping app. So something that we have done for so long, get dressed every morning and then decide either what to wear or what else we need to buy. Even something so simple like that is now being powered by AI. Or you look at Catherine Sizov, who is on the manufacturing and industry list, and she is essentially helping inventory decisions in terms of like produce when they're going to put like apples, let's say, out on shelves. She's using AI and sensors and different forms of new technologies to help people make that more efficient. So I think it really does come down to like using these new technologies to do old things in a lot easier way is kind of like the way that I've been seeing it so far.
It's exciting for us as reporters because we get to kind of watch this revolution happen. And I think there's just, we're seeing it in real time and how young people are really leading the charge on that. Obviously, there's the big players, like OpenAI and Google and Meta, et cetera, but you're seeing all these really young people start businesses and take advantage of not only the resources that these bigger players are giving, but also end up sort of competing with them. So it's been really cool to see. What's been the average age of the listers this year?
Yeah, you're definitely right. Like it is such a young cohort of people. Obviously, in general, we look at people who are under 30 years old, but the average age this year was a little bit under 27 years old. So it is like a young crop of entrepreneurs that are building. Some of those like have gone to either school or have worked for these large companies, to your point, and others have just started it like from the ground up, from their own experience through testing, the waters or doing their own research. It reminds me of Rowan Chung, who is the call it on the education list, where like he tried to go to school and like learn the things that way, but it like wasn't working for him. He realized he was not the best fit for a traditional classroom, so he decided to start teaching other people things about AI and other new technologies in his own way. Now he has an education platform, a newsletter, social media content, and I think that's the other big trend that I've noticed this year is like how social media or these other digital platforms of like sharing your story have really taken over. I mean, like I said, someone like Rowan, who has millions of followers online for his content solely about AI, all the way down to Alex Warren, who is our most followed person on the list this year with around, 29 million followers online. And so I think that, and within our, top, let's say like 30 most followed candidates this year, we're reaching like 200 million followers across platforms. So I think social is a huge kind of entry point into people becoming entrepreneurs and growing their brands and their businesses. And I think that speaks to how young these founders are. They're understanding that like me and my peers and also the people who want to use the platform or the products or the services are online. So we have to reach them where they're at right now. Have you noticed the same thing, or how has social shown up in the categories that you're working on?
Just thinking even about our call outs, like Anna Cathcart on Hollywood, she is using social media even though she has this whole platform on Netflix, essentially, and she's gone from, being she had this role in this series, To All the Boys I've Ever Loved Before, and then she got her own spin-off, XO Kitty, so she really has the spotlight on herself, but even she says that you need to use social media because, like, every time you put out something, you're essentially putting a billboard of yourself. Also, like Claudia Sulewski, I would say that she really got her start on social media, and then now she's building all these products for body care. So it goes both ways. I think you see a lot of companies, like even on our food and drink list, our call-out saws, they talked a lot about how they've really used social media to promote their products, and obviously we've seen that nonstop. Social media is the greatest marketing tool out there, but I think it's interesting how it goes both ways, that you can go from social media to becoming an entrepreneur, or you can be an entrepreneur and use social media to become a content creator and then really excel. What's interesting about Alex Warren, though, is he, I interviewed him and he claimed that he doesn't even go on social media anymore, which I don't know how true that is because he comes up on my For You page all the time. But it's interesting because he says now that he has this success, he kind of wants to take a step back from social media, and it's too much for him to handle. But it's so interesting because that's been such a big factor in his growth and in bringing him to the fame he has today. He started off as a content creator. He was actually homeless, and he was, vlogging his life, like singing in 24-hour fitness bathrooms, and he eventually just kept on creating content and kept on growing and was a founder of the Hype House, which is just a random fun fact that a lot of people don't seem to know. But yeah, social media turned him into a musician. So it's not only like, you're becoming entrepreneurs, social media can open so many doors for you. But that was I think his story was fun. Do you see with anybody sort of a pushback from social media like I saw with Alex, or is that rare?
I think that there definitely is a little bit of both, to your point. Like, it's obviously so critical for people to use, but I think that especially founders today are getting smarter with how they're using social, and maybe they're not showing up in the same way that a content creator would, but they're using it in different ways to share the story behind their brand, kind of the behind the scenes of what they're building, their products themselves, and in a way that isn't necessarily like pushing products to consumers, but just giving kind of an inside look at what it's like to be a founder today. I think that that's another thing that I feel like so many members of this younger generation talk about, is just like wanting to see a little bit of like realness online and like wanting to see behind the curtain. So I think that people, depending on the industry, are using it in so many different ways from each other. But I think like a lot of the list too, it definitely is like traditional ways of building a business, and not all of these platforms or these founders have needed social media to grow. I mean, you look at something like, Kriya, for instance, which is our media call out, and you would think like, oh, they're on the media list, they might be using all these different forms of media to grow and promote their product as well. For them, it really is just about like having a great product product, and finding these investors. They're backed by $83 million in funding to build like an all hands on deck like creative suite, essentially, where artists can come to the platform and edit or render or generate images, music, videos, kind of across the media landscape, which is just so fun for I feel like us to look at. Obviously, in like the journalism world, we talk about how, again, AI is impacting all these different industries, but for someone like Victor and Diego, who are the co-founders of Krea, they really are coming at this from like an artist first perspective. So I think that's been something that's interesting too. Like, while social is growing so much, it's not like necessarily the single most important factor in a lot of these companies. Still getting that large amount of funding that you were mentioning earlier, and kind of going about doing business in more traditional ways, still definitely exists, I would say.
That reminds me of Decagon, which is one of the highest funded companies this year. They're our featured honoree on AI, and Decagon really hasn't tapped much into social media, but you will see them in like airports and like on the street in like billboards and stuff. So they're really using those traditional ways of marketing themselves, as opposed to the new way of marketing yourself. And Decagon's building AI agents, and they're selling them to other companies like ClassPass or Duolingo that can use them to handle things like credit card replacements, or just handling all things customer service. So it's interesting because their means of marketing is literally just going to these companies and pitching themselves, in person, and they've really grown to a $1.5 billion valuation. So yeah, it does show that social media isn't everything these days, and traditional business definitely exists. We've talked a lot about our call-outs or our featured honorees. Should we maybe dive into how we actually pick those people?
Yes, let's do it. So yeah, if someone asks you like, how do I become the face of a category for the under 30 list, what's your answer to them?
I would say it's a tricky question. No, I'm kidding. I think it depends category to category. Like, we have our 20 categories. The call out is going to look a little different for each of them. However, the one thing that's the common thread is there needs to be influence, and that influence can look like money, or that influence can look like following, or it can look like just having someone who can represent the entire industry. So for example, like, we're talking about AI. Obviously, we're going to pick this company that's valued at $1.5 billion. They're working on AI agents, which literally every other startup these days is trying to work on, but they've kind of been the leader in that, and they've really soared, and they have that influence of having the funding. They have $231 million, and they have the valuation, and they've really proven themselves. So we're capturing like the moment in time, like what's happening, what's the trend, who represents that trend, who's succeeding in it, and who's gonna keep succeeding in it. Like, we always talk about how to make the list, and you need to have the potential to scale. Our featured honoree definitely needs to have the highest potential to scale. So I think that's one thing. Or with like music, it's the same thing with the moment in time. Last year, our featured honoree, Shabuzi, had the biggest song of the year. This year, Alex Warren's Ordinary has reached 2 billion streams globally. So again, one of the biggest songs of the year, and he's MTV's Best New Artist. He got nominated for the Grammys Best New Artist. And by the way, when we picked him, we didn't know any of those awards were coming, but that's just the thing. Like, we need to have that. It takes a lot of time, and we have an inkling about who is really gonna succeed in the industry and who can represent, each of those categories. Do you want to talk a bit about, like Hollywood and media and how we pick those call-outs?
Definitely. I think like what you're alluding to there is like our need to trend forecast a little bit. Like, this is someone who is succeeding right now, but we have to be able to tell, like, are they going to be able to continue succeeding in the future? And I think that that's a great example of that is Anna Cathcart, who is our Hollywood call-out, as you mentioned. She has been in this franchise for the past 7 years, playing a character that she's been able to grow with, and she is really turning that into like a multi-pronged career. She does brand partnerships with different companies. She's doing an audio series on Audible. Marvel. She's voice acting for Angry Birds 3 that's coming up next year. So like turning her, one franchise that she kind of started in into so many different facets of her career. And like, of course, that will continue as, we hope and we predict by naming her a call out beyond. I think that's a great, example of that. It also reminds me of Jonathan Lord, who is our transportation and aerospace call out this year. He is building basically the electric vehicle of the sea. So we've seen for the past, decade, let's say, more and more thought and money and like energy put behind, literally energy, but put behind these electric vehicles. But on his side of things, he's using that and kind of momentum to do the same thing for boats. So again, like it's something that like it's the right place, right time of like this industry is growing and evolving. But this is where we see and where, these call outs see it going next. And I think if people can kind of speak to or like be building something that really shows that they have that foresight and like what's next for these categories, that's a great, kind of indicator for us to choose them as the face of the category. In terms of then like the category call out and then the list in general, we mentioned here too, like the call out will want to be either highly funded or successful financially, and have that scale and that influence as well. What else from this year's list do you feel like really stood out to you of something that would like be a green flag or a red flag of people that you're looking at call out wise or just across the list in general?
Yeah, going back to calls for just a second, I do want to say, like money isn't actually everything because that influence can look different. One example I think of is Ethan Barajas on the science list. He's building robots for space, as I had mentioned earlier, using AI, and they're meant to handle these tedious tasks that astronauts have to do, like just moving around cargo in space. So he's like, why not build robots to handle that? But even though he has such a brilliant idea, the money is really not that high. He has $6.1 million in funding, which compared to some of our other listers is kind of low. And him and I talked about this. But what's really interesting is that they have great credible backers. So they have partnerships with NASA and they're working with the space station. So I think a lot of people always ask us whether it's for being a call out or for just being on the list, like how much does the money matter? Obviously money matters and there should be, it just helps us like gauge credibility there. But I think it's important to note that it also just sometimes looks like who are your partners and who is backing you and what other resources do you have that make you stand out. In terms of green flags and red flags, that's an interesting question. I have to think about that. Let's come back to that in a second.
Your point there though about having the like legit backers, I think is a really like overlooked part of our job, and that's why we talk with investors and universities or larger organizations that like really have a stakeholder in these different industries to kind of find out from them who they would nominate, who they recommend for these lists. And this is diverting a bit from this year's list and moving into our different features for this year's magazine. And for those who don't know, we have the list that comes out, but we also then do coverage on past under 30s who have continued to succeed post making the list. This year, Zoya, one of your features is on Brink, which is a drone company. To your point about having important backers, like they have really gone directly to the source of their customers, to the police stations around the country that they want to work with. Can you tell me a little bit about that feature and a little bit about Blake, who's the founder in the first place, and just what that experience was like for you, what you noticed from that reporting process?
Yeah, so Blake is one of our alumni from the 2022 social impact list, actually. And he's building drones for the police and fire departments across the United States. And he's only 25 years old and he's very talented. He's been building these drones since he was 10 years old, but he's also up against a really big challenge, which is actually China, because China controls 70% of the world's drones, including all the drones that are currently being used by, not all of them, but a good majority of the drones that are being used by police officers or even federal agencies like ICE. So DJI is this Chinese drone maker that's really controlling this whole market. And what Blake is trying to do is go up against them. So his niche is that his drones are built solely for public safety. But DJI was really quick to tap into that niche. Like while they make commercial drones, they quickly recognized there's a need for drones to be used in 911 emergencies. So now they're building for that too. So while Blake, his revenues aren't very high at Brink, we estimated about 5 million last year, looking at somewhat of 15 million this year. The money's not really crazy, but he has those backers, as you mentioned. He has Sam Altman, who wrote the first check into his company, which is incredibly impressive. He has Index Ventures, he has Peter Thiel. So he has these very incredible backers. He's got $157 million in funding. And he's really going out to these police stations to meet mayors and chiefs literally 3 days a week and really putting in the work to sell these made in America drones. And it's actually incredible timing because very soon, later this month, it's going to be decided whether or not DJI gets banned in the United States over national security concerns and data being sent back to Beijing. So if that happens, it could be massive for American drone manufacturing, which really there aren't many players there. There's Brink and there's Skydio and Flock is trying to tap into space, but it's going to be a huge deal. It's really going to open up the market to these American companies, and this 25-year-old is just really trying to be the one that dominates, and it's just exciting to see whether or not he's going to get there. But yeah, I think the alum features are always so fun because it's the same thing as our, call outs where we're trying to capture what's timely, what is being talked about. We did a feature on 11 Labs, which makes voice AI agents, which again is so timely, and they're now billionaires, the founders. And then we have Lily Reinhardt, which you covered. So do you want to talk a little bit about what made that feature so timely for this year?
Yeah, so I wrote the Lily Reinhardt feature this year for the alum package, and I think that she is a perfect example of kind of what we were alluding to earlier, and like all this is coming full circle here, but she is someone who has built her career in the public eye in Hollywood. She really got her big break in Riverdale, which so many people of our generation watched on the CW growing up. And that ran from 2017 to 2023. And since then, she has kind of been, what she said is she felt like kind of in like a slower period, kind of off the radar a bit. Right after Riverdale wrapped in 2024 is when the writer's strike happened, and then she has kind of been like coming back into these projects ever since then. So she just had multiple projects come out this summer, an indie film called American Sweatshop about a content moderator, and she plays that content moderator and kind of this journey that she goes on, and another indie TV show called Hal and Harper, which she worked on with Cooper Rafe, who is another under 30 alum, and she's kind of been in this like indie TV and filmmaking world, and we spoke a lot about how these independent projects are a bit harder to make right now because so much of the TV and film and Hollywood industry is relying on very fast-paced content like works of art. So she's kind of like diverting from that a little bit in the acting projects that she's working on to be able to get more into like the nitty-gritty like filmmaker essence like of what she is creating. But on the other side of that, she's also building a skincare company called Personal Day, and she has totally leaned into the social media side of things to grow that brand. She even told me that she's, really well known now for her ASMR like cookie reviews and food reviews on TikTok, which has gained her like millions of followers on the platform. And she said explicitly to me, like, that was a strategy to increase my following before I launched my beauty company, because I know the power of social media today. My team knows the power. The people around me know the power of like reaching these, especially younger consumers, because her, kind of target demographic with Personal Day is this like younger millennial Gen Z audience, and she knows that's where they're at. So it was really fun to talk to her about like coming from this traditional Hollywood landscape and then using these, again, new methods of like media and mediums to reach audiences today, which like we've been talking about this whole time is really kind of of the name of the game right now. I feel like using new technologies to make old new again and to kind of continue changing and being willing to adapt to how industries are changing. I think that that's something that I have noticed a lot with the under 30s that we have covered, is just like the willingness to just adapt and be nimble and like change on a dime when you need to kind of like pivot or make a decision in the company. So it's been fun to see how these different companies and founders, both alum and from the list this year, are doing that and continuing to do that. Do you have, my last question for you is, do you have any like major takeaways of the list this year, favorite parts of the process, or things that you're excited to see come to fruition within the next like 12 months?
I would say my favorite parts are obviously picking our call outs, because I think that's really exciting because they get to be the face of the category. We get to, do shoots with them and interview them on camera. And it's just, I think the process of picking them is really fun, because obviously we're not like thinking, okay, this is the one person, we're going to go after them. We are listing out options on options and dissecting again and again who we really think represents each of the categories. So I would say that's my favorite part. I'm just excited to see how all these companies grow in the next 12 months, to be honest. Like, even from our 2025 list, we've had 7 new billionaires come out just from that 2025 list. It might be more, but I'm thinking of the founders of Mercor, who, again, an AI company. Now, those 3 founders are billionaires. Cursor, another AI company, those 4 founders are billionaires. So you've really seen a lot of the companies grow over this past year and keep on making headlines and keep on raising money and just really dominate their spaces, which again is like the whole point of the 30 under 30 list, is like to show that young people are really leading the charge, and they are these, these business people who for many years were undermined. Randall Lane at Forbes always says that he started the under 30 list because he felt like there was no community of young founders that could help each other, and young founders were always undermined. And now, like 15 years later, oh yeah, it's our 15th anniversary, let's not forget. 15 years later, you really see young people just being older people are coming to these younger founders for advice, for mentorship, for, being their customers. So it's really cool to see that. Obviously, every year we get the question from the people who didn't make the cut, what they can do better or why they didn't make it. Obviously, there's so many different answers to that. But what would you tell the people who, are still very much under 30, who would like to apply again, and they just didn't make it this year?
I think the biggest thing for the candidates that we look at is having like a really clear thesis about like what you're doing and the impact that you're making. So sometimes that's money that you're making based on your product or service. Another time that's the scale or the influence that you are able to have. And the people that come to us with like really clear bios and blurbs about like who they are, what their company does, and why that matters for economy and business and the communities that they're reaching, I think is always the most important. Like as succinct and like straightforward as you can make it when you're applying is always the piece of advice that I give people, because so many people are doing interesting things that they're really passionate about. But I think in order to like break through the noise, there needs to be a really clear reasoning of like why it doesn't just matter to you, but like why it's truly impacting other people out there. So just being clear about that and coming with numbers, like as many metrics as you can give us, as much as you can show us in as objective of examples as you can, the impact that you're making and the change that you're making on the world is always what we look for as under 30 editors.
So now on to the next one.
Here we go. I know we'll get ready to kick off the next year's list just in a couple of months here. In the meantime, I think that we would love for people to go check out those interviews with the call-outs like we've mentioned. They're online along with the under 30 list. Those features like we mentioned on Brink, on Lily Reinhart, on so many of these other companies. And to your mention there about the billionaires, we also have a story coming out about the under 30s who have gone from the under 30 list to the billionaires list. So there's so much more like content and news and things that we have kind of created for this package this year. So I would encourage people to go check it out.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me, Alex.